Truth, Money, and Freedom podcast.
35 minutes after the hour. Glad to have you with us. Glad to be with you. Ron Calzone is with us. MoFirst.org. And PDMP has come back. It just keeps coming back, and it is really a lousy piece of legislation. We're living under it here in Boone County. Quite a bit of the state is, but I don't want to see this being brought back statewide. Ron has been down talking about it. He's been trying to educate about it and let people know. Ron, welcome. How are you this morning?
I'm quite well, Gary. How are you?
I'm doing well. A friend of mine just sent me a text, said Ron Calzone and I both just testified on the Second Amendment Preservation Act in the Senate this morning. I asked him about it. I was really happy to finally meet him. So let's cover both of these. Second Amendment preservation, where do we stand down there?
Well, the first hearing for SAPA was heard this morning in the Senate Transportation and Public Safety Committee. The hearing went well. There were quite a few people there in support of it. The Moms Demand Action folks were there with one witness that testified against it. But other than that, there was no one in opposition to it. It really is kind of a common sense piece of legislation. It's all about proper jurisdiction. What is the proper jurisdiction of the federal government versus the state government? And it's really kind of gun law neutral. It's not changing who can own what. It's just saying that the gun-related laws or firearm-related laws that apply to Missourians should be the ones that Missouri lawmakers have enacted. So Missouri laws for Missourians, not federal laws for Missourians.
Did you get a lot of?
So that's going.
Did you get a lot of kickback from the Democrats?
No, actually, there was no kickback even from the Democrats. There's only two sitting on that committee, but there was none. The bill after that was the gun-free zone bill, and also sponsored by Senator Eric Burleson, and there was some kickback on that. But the only as far as the Second Amendment Preservation Act is concerned, there was someone had ties to law enforcement there, and he pointed out that the Second Amendment Preservation Act is a pro-law enforcement bill as well.
Yeah, I think I know who that is. Let's move on to PDMP.
I thought you might.
Because this thing just keeps coming up, and it won't go away. So let's dig into it a little bit. First, what do you find most objectionable about this PDMP? This is the legislation that means, essentially, if you go to your doctor and you need a pharmaceutical to relieve the pain, your name gets put into a database, and it can be researched, and it can be hacked.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the worst data hacks are in the healthcare industry. So, of course, PDMP puts every honest, law-abiding Missouri citizen that buys Schedule 2 through 4 drugs legally in a government database, and that's what's bad about it. But the thing I wanted to report this morning is what happened on the floor with it. I don't know if you realized that the House took up the PDMP bill, the House version of it, and they, quote, perfected it. So they had their perfection vote. And so it's ready now for the third read vote in the House, at which time then it'll go over to the Senate for a hearing and then through that process on the Senate side. But the thing that's so interesting about it is that every year support for PDMP erodes. It's less and less every year. And the thing that's really interesting this year is there was a representative named Justin Hill offered an amendment on the floor, and the amendment was very common sense. It said that, we'll enact PDMP, but after 2 years, if it's not producing positive results, we repeal it all. And that's pretty common sense, don't you think?
Yeah. If it's not working, get rid of it.
Yeah. So that amendment failed. But the interesting thing is that you have a supermajority of Republicans in both the House and the Senate, and most Republicans voted for that amendment. There were more Republicans that voted for that amendment, that was a common sense amendment, than voted against it. So right now, that means that in this very, very strong Republican legislature, the PDMP issue has become a Democrat issue. And it's still passing, and it's still still advancing, at least on the House side. And frankly, if it wasn't for a handful of stalwart members in the Senate, the majority of the Senate would probably take it up and pass it too, even though they're Republicans.
How might this affect? How might this affect my Second Amendment rights?
Well, of course, the problem is that your name ends up in a government database, and by design, that Missouri database is shared with other states. And there's no doubt that data ends up available to the federal government. So although we have a very Second Amendment friendly state, our concerns, and this is why we have the Second Amendment Preservation Act, our concerns are about federal intrusions on your right to bear arms. And so if there is for instance, a federal red flag law passed, a set of PDMP data could be used against you to take away your right to bear arms because of, say, perhaps you buy a pain reliever because you had knee replacement surgery, but that same drug is one that's sometimes used to deal with people who have psychotic problems. That could be the basis for a red flag. And then you get a knock on the door from ATF and they want to take your guns away. Similarly, though, every time you buy a new firearm, you have to get an instant background check, a NICS check. And they could use that data and cross-tabulate it, and you go buy a new gun, and you don't know why, but you've been denied the right to buy that gun because of something they found in the PDMP database. We see that same thing happening to veterans now. So some people that are using the VAs coming back from, say, the Mideast wars are being flagged, and they're not allowed to buy a gun because of some of the same kind of misuse of data.
This is scary. Does it look like it's actually going to go through in the House? I mean, is it, kind of scare me that it's going to go through.
No, PDMP has been passing the House. It will pass the House again. But the thing that's interesting about it is the more the House members learn about it, the more they find out that PDMPs in other states are not working. They found out, one of the facts that was presented to them this session is that after a couple years, the PDMP that you're under in Boone County is not working. The opiate-related deaths have gone up 30% in the time that PDMP program from St. Louis County that Boone County is part of has been implemented. So they're collecting personal data on people. They're violating their Fourth Amendment rights, and for nothing because it's not achieving the desired advertised results.
Could we be seeing, Ron, and if you just turn the radio on, Ron Calzone with us, MoFirst.org, could we be seeing the impact with a higher rate of deaths? Could PDMP be actually creating an environment where instead of going to my doctor to relieve my pain, I go to a drug dealer on the street and end up getting shot in a bad drug deal, or I end up getting something laced with fentanyl?
Well, okay, I'm not sure about the former, but the latter also is part of the dialogue right now, and that's what's swaying some of these people that used to support PDMP. There's lots of evidence that when you make it hard for people to get legitimate prescriptions for drugs, they do go to the street, and you're right, fentanyl is a big part of the problem, and so we're talking about illicit black market drugs that don't have quality control. And quality control can mean that they're poison, but it also could mean that there's varying strengths. And so when people are forced to go to the street, sometimes people that have legitimate pain problems, they're forced to go to the street and buy drugs. They end up buying something maybe that's stronger than they're used to, and they take what would be a normal dose of it for them, and they overdose.
The
data supports the idea that PDMPs are actually causing more deaths than they're helping.
Call me crazy, but I would rather somebody who is addicted to any pharmaceutical go see a doctor in order to get their pharmaceuticals that rather than have them go to the street to do it. I'd rather they encounter a doctor who might be able to give them some advice on how to get off the drugs. I'd rather that a doctor look at him and say, "Oh boy, it looks like you've got a problem here," than avoid the doctor and go to the streets. It's another piece of feel-good legislation that's going to backfire in so many ways and kill so many innocent people. Can we, if you think it's going to pass in the House and it's a fait accompli, what about the Senate?
Well, the Senate is where we've always stopped it in the past. So it's been for the last several years. It's pretty easily passed the House. The support in the House is diminishing, but the Senate has been where it's been stopped. And so I think there's still a pretty good bulwark of opposition in the Senate. I think it goes down in the Senate, particularly because there is so much more additional evidence that PDMPs are just not working.
Somebody wanted to know if there is a House bill number that we can tell callers to or
House
listeners.
Bill number for PDMP, let's see, it might come to me. House Bill 1693.
HB 1693. Call your rep and tell them no.
Yeah, there's one more vote. I don't believe that the third read vote has happened yet.
Yeah, but they can start expressing their disdain right from the get-go.
Right, and it's being whispered in my ear from deep in the belly of the beast here at the Capitol building that the third read vote for the PDMP bill is on Monday. So that means that your listeners have until Monday to voice their opinion, particularly right now to their state rep. So third read vote is in the House of Representatives. And then again, right after that third read vote, then it goes over to the Senate. And
all right. You don't think it's going to happen in the Senate. You think there's enough resistance there to stop this. Let me ask you one last question before I let you go, because I'm running out of time. But I am curious. When you compare the state of Missouri, which does not have a statewide PDMP, to the other 49 states, where do we stand in terms of death from opioid?
We're right in the middle of the pack.
So shouldn't we be at the top of the pack? Shouldn't we be like the number one state where people are dying from overdose?
That's right. As the only state without a statewide PDMP, then you would think if PDMPs actually work, we would have the worst opiate problem of all the states, but we don't.
I'm reminded of my mother. Who used to say, well, if everybody else jumped off a bridge, would you jump off a bridge? And in this case, I'm hoping that legislators in the state of Missouri decide not to jump off the bridge because everybody else did. Ron Calzone, have you got anything up at mofirst.org right now to educate people?
There's always good stuff if you want to peruse the website. And, we're trying to keep some of the latest information up about the Second Amendment Preservation Act. Not quite so much about PDMP, just for lack of time. But you can always go to mofirst.org and learn some things.
All right. Ron Calzone, thank you for being with us. All right. Back in a few, Dave Rowland is going to be with us. Gary Nolan, Zimmer Radio Network.